Good morning. I see this week that the Irish government is bragging about the offshore wind project off the Waterford coast and how it's going to fix some of Ireland's problems regarding sustainability and also reducing Ireland's carbon footprint. Again, smoke and mirrors, nothing but smoke and mirrors. 2 years ago, I debated this on WLR, Waterford Local Radio, about the problems of offshore wind. And of course, the following day they brought on a lobbyist for the offshore wind company, and he spouted a whole bunch of nonsense regarding offshore wind, saying that it was cheaper electricity and it was going to bring down energy costs. That couldn't be any further from the truth. The problem with offshore wind is immense. One of the things, the environmental impact that these farms are actually having have never been assessed. So they're putting offshore wind farms off the Irish coast, and there is no environmental impact study after being carried out. The one thing is very, very clear, that other areas around the world where they put in these wind farms, there's after been savage problems. One thing I noticed there some years ago, and that was off the coast of Denmark. Everywhere where you had these farms in these bays, that marine life collapsed in the space of 8 or 10 years. And how that is happening, any fish when they spawn, the fish makes its way up to the larvae, the fish makes its way up to the upper water column. Same as plankton does in the night. So as the larvae, these fish, are drifting through the ocean current on the upper water column, the filter feeders on these structures are totally invasive to the areas they're actually in. And of course, they consume these larvae, these fish. And after a period of time, everything collapses. The whole marine ecosystem collapses. You hear some people saying, well, you go near offshore structures and it's a haven for fish, you see larger fish. Yes, you will see some larger fish around the structures. But over a period of time, recruitment numbers that go back to the ocean floor collapses. How that is happening is, again, about the larvae making its way up through the water column, the filter feeders eating them, and of course recruitment back to the ocean floor when these larvae are large enough to make its way down to the ocean floor. Of course, fish stocks collapse. This has happened already in Denmark. I was shocked when I saw these bays, these big beautiful bays in Denmark, and there was no fishing in them. And I remember speaking to some people in Denmark and I said, hey, what is going on? I was there at the time getting these MPEDs, this technology we have for collecting plastic and microplastics from the ocean. And when I was speaking to these guys, as an environmentalist and a person that originated in the fishing industry, I was saying, like, what's going on? Why don't you have any boats fishing in the bays? And they said there's no fish there anymore. And it was an interesting conversation. And at the same time, it didn't make any sense. Where was all the fish gone to? And of course, when you speak to them and ask them, when did it happen? And they said over a 10, 12-year period, you saw gradual reduction of fish inside in these bays. And I said, what has changed in the space of the last 10 to 12 years? They said these structures were built. And of course, I said, can you bring me out? I just want to look at something for a second. So I went down in a small boat, and straight away when it got close to the platforms, you see these billions of different filter feeders growing on the top 3 to 4 to 5 meters of these structures. So a floating structure in the ocean will do the same thing. You have all these filter feeders grow on them, and of course it eats up the larvae, the fish. Plus, of course, these filter feeders are also reducing plankton numbers in the ocean. Then some people said to me, well, you have oil and gas structures also in the ocean. That is true. But the oil and gas structures in the ocean, you're very limited to the amount of them you actually have. Compared to offshore wind, it's not even close. You have what they're proposing there around Europe, and what we've already seen in Europe is thousands and thousands of these structures in the planning stage already after being completed there in our ocean. And of course, over a period of time, everything collapses. But let's look at the bigger picture of this. Why do Ireland need all this electricity? They need it for these data centers that are being built, not for the general public. This is nothing about trying to, again, use this electricity to power our homes. It's really nothing about that. If you can look with the last few days, there was a couple of days with very little wind in Ireland, which many years we'd winters for months and we'd have very, very low amounts of strong winds. So over the last few days, they were shipping, trucking diesel to fill the generators on these wind farms to produce electricity. The price of electricity over these few days increased by 400%. And then when they say they speak about, they said, well, there's a cap on electricity prices with the offshore wind farms. Let's be clear about one thing. Companies need to make profits. Somebody is going to have to pay when these companies are losing money regarding offshore wind. And of course, that's why you see energy prices continuing to increase the whole time. They also make some false claims, and WLR are very fast about promoting misinformation all the time. And what they claim is that the unit price of electricity coming from offshore wind is much cheaper than any other method. But let's dig into that for a minute. That is okay if you're producing wind 24/7. And if you're producing that wind 24/7, then this is the argument that they're coming up with. But the problem is, if the wind blows too strong, they can't produce electricity. If the wind is too low, they don't produce electricity. So overall, over on a yearly basis, these things are not viable. On top of that, the environmental damage they're actually doing to our environment. Ireland is facing a bill from the European Union of 26 billion euros because they can't meet their climate targets. They're saying that Ireland cannot reduce its carbon footprint, but it can't reduce its carbon footprint because they constantly build data centres. The amount of energy that's used for the data centres is immense, but the Irish government turns around and they blame the agricultural industry, they blame every industry for this. They blame yourself, the general public, for this. Ireland, for the most part, is an extremely clean country with very, very little pollution, even though they will tell you something different. They have many people in Ireland believing at this stage that the Irish people are polluting our planet at a rate much faster than many people around the world. They constantly come out with these reports. Again, that is ludicrous. Irish policies from the Irish government, building stupid data centres that create little to no jobs, let's be clear about that, at the same time destroying agricultural land with this. It's no different than good agricultural land. I see it back in my home county, in County Waterford. Prime agricultural land being covered with solar panels. Again, if you look at the solar panels, the seepage and the toxins coming from the solar panels completely destroys agricultural land. There was reports came out of different parts of Scandinavia where they had these solar farms, and they reckoned after that the land itself was unfit to grow any crops for decades after. They don't know how long, but they reckon at least 2 to 3 decades before the land is ever fit again for growing any type of crops. The Irish government speaks about increasing biodiversity on the land, telling farmers they must set land aside and grow nothing on it because they want to increase biodiversity. But they have no problem in covering all the land with solar panels and killing biodiversity. Again, smoke and mirrors. It proves my point the whole time. When you have a school teacher trying to run a very complicated business, which is a country, extremely complicated, that you have a problem. You have someone with an extremely low IQ I should say, I apologize, a really low IQ when it comes to running a business. School teachers have their place in society. And again, it is everyone for what they're actually good at. And a school teacher's place teaching children. I don't think for a minute Micheál Martin is even capable of that. But if you see what is happening in our country, it is absolutely crazy. Electricity prices are constantly on the rise. And of course, the first thing they say is electricity price is rising because we need to decarbonate our economy as quickly as possible. We need to reduce Ireland's carbon footprint, and then they build more data centres. The offshore wind projects is one of the biggest environmental disasters that Ireland is ever heading into. I stand by that. And there is many people like me, environmentalists like me, are saying that is not the way forward. How can you build a massive wind farm off of the Irish coast without any environmental impact studies? I mean, this is crazy. When you have a media that is not willing to debate this, you have Damien Tiernan and others. I'm speaking about Waterford now because I'm speaking about the farm off the Waterford coast. You have Damien Tiernan, a person that's constantly reporting, or constantly promoting, I should say, these farms. Again, you'd have to think, are they getting some type of a kickback? Is it something to do with corruption? How come our politicians and the media are not willing to have an open debate about the negative impact of offshore wind? It is definitely not the way forward. We watch every single thing that we do in Ireland is a disaster when it comes to our marine ecosystem. An absolute disaster. They keep saying one thing and they come up with something else. The last time I spoke about this on radio, like I said, they brought the lobbyists on the following day and refused to actually debate this. A lobbyist that is paid for propaganda, to promote propaganda. Why would he not debate an environmentalist? Why will you give him a platform to spread misinformation and not debate it with an environmentalist? But when you see a couple other things he said the rhetoric coming from myself was something that's been promoted by the oil and gas industry. I'm not trying to promote anything regarding oil and gas. Absolutely nothing. I'm not saying anything positive. I'm not saying anything negative. I am saying that it is, if you weigh the whole thing up between the offshore wind and between the alternatives to wind, we might be better off with the alternatives. Another statistic that they're not willing to look at, the offshore wind structures themselves. Here's another massive problem. Besides the filter feeders, the blades on these turbines, because of wind shear, weather, everything else, the blades themselves, they erode. It is estimated, because of wind shear, these small little nanoparticles that are being knocked off the outside of these blades, again, it is a paint that they put on the outside of the blades instead of a gel coat like a fiberglass you'd have on a boat or something like that. They can't put on a fiberglass gel coat because it's too heavy. They have to keep these ultra light. So it's painted with a chemical, that's a PFAS chemical, is painted to seal the fiberglass matting that's underneath it. So to protect it, to stop it falling apart. So they paint this on these outside of the blades. The problem with that is, once these little fibers are actually knocked off, these fibers, they end up inside in the ocean. It's estimated, this is very interesting, it's estimated per kilo that are knocked off a blade per year, there's 2.65 quadrillion particles. Remember, 24 zeros in a quadrillion. 2.65 quadrillion particles are being knocked into the ocean per kilo. It's estimated anywhere up to 30 kilos in a year. You just do the math on that. It's absolutely ludicrous. The problems with these particles that go into the ocean, first of all, the sealant that's put on the outside of these, the chemicals that's in these, is totally illegal under international law to actually use. 100% illegal. So once these particles ends up in the ocean, during the night time, right, you have lavia fish, you also have, again, plankton that increases through the water column to feed, right? So they're feeding on the surface or close to the surface. They see these small particles in the ocean. They go along and they go to eat it. Once they go to eat it, it's poisoning them and it's killing them. Another reason why our entire marine ecosystem is collapsing. Anywhere we already have these, and the proposal by the Irish government to put them off the Waterford coast or anywhere around the Irish coast is an absolute disaster. It doesn't make any sense. Again, 24 zeros in a quadrillion. Like, what are they thinking here? None of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. The destruction they're actually doing is absolutely crazy. There was footage from the Martha's Vineyard wind farm off the coast of Massachusetts, and they showed on the ocean floor scallops. Because of the magnetic field coming from these cables that are running ashore, they saw these scallops were unable to move. The scallop was on the bottom of the ocean floor, and again, it was just like it does, filter feeds, and of course, it's just unable to move. What they saw was actually scary, where starfish that didn't seem to be as affected as bad as the scallops. The starfish were able to walk up on top of the scallops and destroy the beds of scallops, wipe them out. The scallops were unable to clap their shell to swim away from the starfish. So the scallops started to collapse. Everything with them is a disaster for the marine ecosystem, but they still promote the misinformation. I'm asking Damien Tiernan, again, that I want to go on his show. He's promoting this all last week, again, about how great offshore wind is. Let's debate it. Let's finally debate it, have a proper debate, and discuss what is going on. Stop spreading misinformation, and let's have a discussion on what exactly is going on. Don't promote something, one side of a story, when you're saying this is great and applauding it, and everyone's saying this is the only way forward, when it's not. It is a disaster for our marine ecosystem. I'm also calling on all the groups that oppose this in County Waterford, the different groups that are against the offshore wind, to let us come together. Let's figure out a way that we can get a lawsuit filed in the European Union to stop this. This has to be stopped. This is a disaster for our ocean. At least they should not be able to build these till we do an environmental impact studies on the issues that I've already spoken about. We have a lot of fish stocks off the Waterford coast and all around the Irish coast that are already depleted, greatly depleted. So every year as we do a stock assessment for seafood and say we have a quota, say, of 1,500 tons of a particular species of fish, we say that the fishing industry can actually catch for it to be sustainable. Then if they go out and catch that, that doesn't mean it was sustainable, because nobody can take into account for what the damage the offshore wind industry is actually doing. This is all about money, all about big profits. It's about mindless government policies, again, pushing a narrative that is totally false. We need to come together and stop this. At the end of the day, Ørsted, the Danish company that is promoting this offshore wind so-called technology, should not be getting away with what they're getting away with. They were kicked out of the United States for the most part with all the projects they had, because lack of environmental impact studies, which was zero. And of course, one other thing the lobbyists said, which is very important, and Damien Tiernan type of sniggered at it and went along with them and promoted the lie, promoted the misinformation. And that was about whales. Why are whales being killed? The lobbyists did admit that there's an increase in the number of whales that died when the seismic work, and when the activities were being carried out off the east coast of the United States. We agree, the amount of whales deaths did increase. He then went along and say that all these organizations, like Greenpeace and everyone else, said that these whales were killed with ships, most of them killed by ships. A couple of them with gear entanglement, and he said the others were down to the fishing industry. Let's break that down for a second. First of all, we have less ships in the ocean and less fishing vessels than ever before. The number is on the decline. There's larger container ships moving containers from A to A to B, so you have less ships instead of more. That is very, very clear. In the fishing industry, let's say off the east coast of the United States, there is less fishing vessels in the water than ever before. Quotas are being consolidated on vessels, which means 2 or 3 boats quota can be put on one vessel, so less vessels in the water. So you have less vessels in the water, less ships in the water, and less commercial fishing vessels in the water, but you have a massive increase we had in the number of whales that were dying. So what is happening? It is very clear what's happening. Whales do not like marine noise. They stay away from it. So if you have a line of structures off the coast, that is pushing all the marine mammals well away from that. So they're being pushed in a smaller area. On top of that, then you have commercial shipping that cannot navigate from A to B in an area that their traditional shipping routes. they're after being moved into a smaller area too. So you have more vessels in a smaller area, you have more marine mammals in a smaller area, which means more collisions. So who is responsible for the deaths of the whales? It is the offshore wind industry. They're the ones that are displacing the regular migrate routes of the whales. They're the ones also pushing commercial shipping into a smaller body of water inside the ocean, which is creating this problem. Again, Damien, don't promote misinformation. Let's have a debate with the good old lobbyist and environmentalists like myself. Let's debate this. Let's not push a narrative out that is not open for discussion. What is happening is an absolute disaster for our marine ecosystem. An absolute disaster. The offshore wind industry is not the way forward. 100% is not the way forward. These projects must be halted as soon as possible. Again, I call on all the folks in Ireland that oppose the offshore wind industry. Please contact me. Let's figure out a way through the courts to stop this nonsense for once and for all. We do not need these offshore structures. We need to find alternatives. We also do not need these data centres that are no good for our economy, besides some jobs building the centres. But after that, all it's doing is increasing electricity prices, and for the most part on local communities around Ireland, increasing debt because of that. We need a way to improve the lives of the Irish people, reduce prices, not increase prices. And again, thank you very much and good morning.